So this is chapter 1, spring 1887. Even with the war a little more than 2 decades in the past, John was a virtual slave, chained to the people who'd once legally owned his mother. At 17, and his youth pulling at him to go, to explore, to find a woman, he hankered to break the chain and go elsewhere, anywhere that wasn't Richmond. But thoughts of leaving his saintly mother kept the chain in place. His mother would die of a broken heart if he told her about what Madame Laura Billingsley had made him do a few years back. Laura had figured he wouldn't tell a soul, surely not his mother, and certainly not Monsieur Tyrone Billingsley. Laura had been right. He hated the suffocating mental cage Madame Billingsley caused him to live in. She had taken away his freedom to even tell a secret to his mother. As much as he wanted to mute the voices in his head telling him to kill Madame Billingsley, the voices lingered. He stood, one spring evening in the butler's pantry, and poured imported sherry into 2 teardrop sherry glasses, as he had done so many times. He could pour exactly 3 ounces of sherry into each glass with his eyes closed, without spilling a drop. John was a lean 5'11" tall. He had short, wavy, raven black hair, russet copper-tinted eyes, a mahogany-colored face, full lips, and a slightly bent nose that sat atop a strong jaw. Tyrone Billingsley demanded that John be turned out in fine clothes when he worked in the house, or when he took Billingsley to town. So this evening, he wore the usual attire. A white shirt with a stiff standing collar, a black vest that closed almost at the throat, thereby almost covering his tie, a short black waist jacket that exposed his shirt cuffs, black breeches, and black lace shoes. It was almost dinner time at the Billingsleys' mansion, also known as Billingsley. Torrential rain had enveloped Richmond for 5 consecutive days. The crop fields, cleared by former slave labor, had turned into bogs. Laura stood in front of the oversized rondel dining room window, her right hand pressed against it. She felt the window vibrate as the hail and rain pelted it. She looked at the leaden sky and wondered if the window, and all the windows in her mansion, would protect her and her expensive furnishings from the relentless barrage of water sent from above. She saw in the reflection when Tyrone sat at the dining table. Then she drew the heavy, ornate blue velvet curtains and joined him at the other end. Just the 2 of them. The Billingsley estate was large, both the house and the 300 acres of surrounding land. The house was an 8,000-square-foot, 25-room Greek Revival house, characterized by Dorian pillars that wrapped around it. Intricate wrought-iron gates connected the pillars on the second-floor portico. The long entranceway leading to the front of Billingsley was adorned with live oak trees that were arranged symmetrically on each side. Sprawling gardens and landscaping contained 24 flower beds and 20 different kinds of trees. Seemingly endless walkways formed a maze. A heavily adorned pergola stood at the rear of the massive botanical garden. Laura had been known to lose herself in the gardens after an argument with her husband. When the last of the Billingsley children had moved out several years ago, Tyrone Billingsley had decided to reduce his kitchen staff, expecting that he and Laura could get by with 1 cook. Laura had protested, believing that her society friends would whisper that something was wrong with the Billingsleys, that they were depleting their money. Tyrone had won that battle, but Laura knew when to keep her powder dry and when to strike with a full frontal assault. Her husband had felt it many times before, as had Sam, John, Anne, and anyone else in her line of fire. Sam, the Billingsleys' longtime cook, had prepared one of Laura's favorite dishes for the evening. Lobster cutlet, a pastry shell filled with a timbale of black grouse and a chestnut puree, spring lamb, and Johnny cake. The Billingsleys often had a bracer before their meal. Today was no different. The sherry aperitif would be served at 6:30 and was their custom when Tyrone was in town. A maraschino cherry sorbet would be served at the end of the meal to refresh the palate. John's stomach gurgled, and his hands felt heavy as he prepared to serve dinner to the Billingsleys. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath to exorcise all images of what Laura had done to him a few years ago, and to slow the heart rate as much as he could. He stood ramrod straight, picked up the salver that held the Billingsley sherry aperitif, and walked gingerly into the dining room. He surveyed the dining table setup, hoping, praying, that he had set the table pieces to Madame Billingsley's satisfaction. She was persnickety, and the icy matron of the house. Everything was in place, and John's heartbeat returned to its normal rhythm. A thunderclap startled him, causing him to stop in his tracks. Horrible images of Laura resurfaced. His heartbeat quickened again, and his mouth went dry, anticipating some kind of rebuke from her, his perfect table setup notwithstanding. A corner of the ornate Persian rug on which the dining table sat was curled up. John failed to notice it, tripped, and spilled the drink on the Ice Queen. She shot him a 3-second basilisk stare, then screamed, "You stupid idiot!" As she used her white, monogrammed linen napkin in an effort to dry the amber stain from the lace on her pink satin polonaise, John said, "I'm sorry, Madame Billingsley." She raised her head from her dress, and John suffered through the same stare that could stop a charging bull in its tracks. He thought he had gotten used to Madame Billingsley's obliques. But this time they stung hard, penetrating the fortress he'd erected around himself to deflect her fusillade of contemptuous sniping. She had managed, though, to intensify his hatred for her. "Laura, it was an accident," Tyrone said. Laura rose up from her chair in a huff, paused to steady herself from John's mishap, and hurried over to look in the Louis XV gilt-framed mirror, which hung above the Louis XV-styled birch sideboard. She turned and eyed Tyrone. John watched the amber-colored stain on her dress expand in size. She stormed out of the dining room and ran up the garish, sweeping, walnut-paneled staircase, hurried to the master bedroom, and slammed the door. Tyrone took in a mouthful of grouse, then suddenly dropped his fork. The clank from the fork startled John, who was cleaning the table of the wreckage from the spilled sherry. John looked into Tyrone's stoic gaze. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't see the carpet was out of place." Tyrone looked at the rug and nodded. Laura stood in front of the cheval in her bedroom and removed her corset with the assistance of her servant, Emmeline, or Auntie Em, as Laura's children referred to her. Laura was a petite woman with Victorian pale skin and long flaxen-colored hair, which she often kept in a stylish chignon netted in a black velvet. She was fastidious about her... Sorry about this. I apologize. She was fastidious about her coiffure and had an on-call coiffeuse, although she had a curvilinear shape that had caused men to ogle when she was younger. She'd begun to fill out the last of her 4 children. She had begun to fill out after the last of her 4 children moved out. She allowed her expensive clothes to camouflage her amorphous shape. Tyrone opened the stately oak bedroom door and walked in. Laura was in the walk-in closet where she had stockpiled her expensive, hot attire. Godey's Lady Book, Harper's Bazaar, and the Delineator kept her abreast of the latest fashions. Her wardrobe was replete with the finest silks, wools, and cottons. She had dresses for each occasion, day, afternoon, evening, and formal. Her clothes were needed for the bon ton who visited her. When robed in her togs, she exuded authority that exceeded her physical stature. After making Tyrone wait for a sufficient amount of time, she walked out of the closet. "His behavior was most unacceptable. I want that sprat out of here. I don't trust him." Arms folded, she looked at Tyrone through narrow eyes, waiting for him to spill out the right answer. "My dear, it was an accident." She tightened her folded arms as if to wait for the right answer. Tyrone stood his ground. For God's sake, just let it go. That boy does fine work around here. Besides, I owe it to Anne to keep him here. And if I were to dismiss him, who'd serve you as well as that boy? He's smart. He does what he's told. Her anger flared hot. She drew herself up even more stiffly and shouted a harsh retort. I don't give a damn! She paused to let Tyrone feel her words. He shook his head but said nothing. She continued. Stop defending that insolent boy. I mean it. She turned around to see Emmeline holding her black pelisse with both arms outstretched, mutely asking if she would like to try it on. Laura liked wearing her haughty attire, even if for a moment. Although Laura didn't care if Emmeline heard her use disparaging language when referring to a Negro, Emmeline managed to escape such degrading remarks. Even after the war, Laura still considered Emmeline her property, for which she deserved some protection. Although the irony was not lost on Tyrone, he didn't say anything. He had learned to live with it. Laura loathed that Tyrone had always been so paternalistic with his slaves and the ones who were his present workers. She thought he was too nice for his own good, failing to understand the immutable law of nature that separated the gentry from the untouchables, the mudsills. John's shift finally ended, giving him a reprieve from Laura's painful disdain. He changed into his tattered togs, placing his work attire in a wardrobe reserved for the house servants. He stepped out the back door and quickly felt the driving rain on his face. He returned to the house and retrieved a mackintosh from the servant's closet and donned it. He cut through the Billingley's soggy wooden botanical garden in the back of the estate, jumped a small wooden fence, and with anger fueling him, he sprinted a quarter of a mile to get home.